Good morning and welcome to Together in God, a media ministry of Grace and St. John's Lutheran Churches. We are affiliated with the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America. We are happy to share with you God's message of love and hope. Today's service is being brought to you from St. John's Lutheran Church. The church is located at 1804 Highland Avenue in Eau Claire. Please join us now in worship.
I invite children to come forward now. Here we go. Come on up here. Why don't you sit here? You can both sit here. Somebody over here. It'll be easier to see. Okay? Get in close. Get in close. I'm going to read a story called The Sneetches. I want to make sure you can see the pictures, okay? Now, the star-belly Sneetches had bellies with stars. The plain-belly Sneetches had none upon theirs. Those stars weren't so big, they were really so small, you might think such a thing wouldn't matter at all. But because they had stars, all the star-bellied Sneetches would brag, "We're the best kind of Sneetches on the beaches." With their snoots in the air, they would sniff and they'd snort, "We'll have nothing to do with the plain-belly sort." And whenever they met some, when they were out walking, they'd hike right on past them without even talking. When the star-bellied children went out to play ball, could a plain belly get in the game? Not at all. You only could play if your bellies had stars and the plain-bellied children had none upon theirs. When the star-bellied Sneetches had Frankfurter roasts or picnics or parties or marshmallow toasts, they never invited the plain-bellied Sneetches. They left them out cold in the dark of the beaches. They kept them away, never let them come near, and that's how they treated them year after year. Then one day, it seems, while the plain-bellied Sneetches were moping and doping alone on the beaches, just sitting there wishing their bellies had stars, a stranger zipped up in the strangest of cars. "My friends," he announced in a voice clear and keen, "my name is Sylvester McMonkey McBean. I have heard of your troubles. I've heard you're unhappy, but I can fix that. I'm the fix-it-up chappie. I've come here to help you. I have what you need, and my prices are low, and I work at great speed. And my work is 100% guaranteed." Then quickly, Sylvester McMonkey McBean put together a very peculiar machine. And he said, "You want stars like a star-belly Sneetch? My friends, you can have them for $3 each. Just pay me your money and hop right aboard." So they clambered inside, and the big machine roared, and it clonked, and it bonked, and it jerked, and it burked, and it bopped them about, but the thing really worked. When the plain-belly Sneetches popped out, they had stars. They actually did. They had stars upon theirs. Then they yelled at the ones who had stars at the start, "We're exactly like you. You can't tell us apart. We're all just the same now, you snooty old smarties, and now we can go to your Frankfurter parties." "Good grief," groaned the ones who had stars at the first. "We're still the best Sneetches, and they are the worst. But now, how in the world will we know?" They all frowned. "If which kind is what, or the other way around?" Then up came McBean with a very sly wink, and he said, "Things are not quite as bad as you think. So you don't know who's who, that's perfectly true. But come with me, friends. Do you know what I'll do? I'll make you again the best Sneetches on beaches, and all it will cost you is $10 eaches." "Bellies are no longer in style," said McBean. "What you need is a trip through my star-off machine. This wondrous contraption will take off your stars so you won't look like Sneetches who have them on theirs." And that handy machine, working very precisely, removed all the stars from their tummies quite nicely. Then with snoots in the air, they paraded about, and they opened their beaks, and they let out a shout, "We know who is who, now there isn't a doubt. The best kind of Sneetches are Sneetches without." Then, of course, those with stars got all frightfully mad. To be wearing a star was now frightfully bad. And then, of course, old Sylvester McMonkey McBean invited them to his star-off machine. Then, of course, from then on, as you can probably guess, things really got into a horrible mess. All the rest of the day on those wild screaming beaches, the fix-it-up chappie kept fixing up Sneetches. Off again, on again, in again, out again. Through the machines they raced round and about again, changing their stars every minute or two. They kept paying money, they kept running through, until neither the plain nor the star-bellies knew whether this one was that one, or that one was this one, or which one was what one, and what one was who. Then, when every last cent of their money was spent, the fix-it-up chappie packed up and he went. And he laughed as he drove in his car up the beach. They never will learn. No, you can't teach a Sneetch. But McBean was quite wrong, I'm quite happy to say, that the Sneetches really got quite smart on that day. The day they decided that Sneetches are Sneetches and no kind of Sneetch is the best on the beaches. That day, all the Sneetches forgot about stars and whether they had one or not upon thars. The story is a good reminder that people who look different, sometimes we laugh at them. We don't want to be around them, but we're all God's children. We're all the same. God loves us each. Thank you for coming up. See you next week. I invite you to stand for the gospel acclamation. The Gospel according to Matthew, the 15th chapter. Glory to you, O Lord. Jesus left that place and went away to the district of Tyre and Sidon. Just then a Canaanite woman from that region came out and started shouting, "Have mercy on me, Lord, Son of David. My daughter is tormented by a demon." But he did not answer her at all. And his disciples came and urged him, saying, "Send her away. She keeps shouting at us." So he answered, "I was sent only to the lost sheep of the house of Israel." But she came and knelt before him, saying, "Lord, help me." He answered, "It is not fair to take the children's food and throw it to the dogs." She said, "Yes, Lord, yet even the dogs eat crumbs that fall from their master's table." Then Jesus answered her, "Woman, great is your faith. Let it be done for you as you wish." And her daughter was healed instantly. The gospel of the Lord. Praise to you, O Christ. You may be wondering why we're doing this bit on racism this morning. It's a legitimate question, and so in doing, I run the risk in preaching on it of wandering into a polarizing political issue and emotion that blurs the line between social and religious issues. But I'm doing so for three reasons, the first of which Pastor Christine mentioned. Our presiding Bishop, Elizabeth Eaton, asked ELC pastors to do that this Sunday in support of our brothers and sisters in African American churches. The second reason, and the reason why I suspect she chose this Sunday, was that today's gospel, which is part of a repeating 3-year series of lectionary readings, just happens to have racism as one of its central themes. But the third reason is a pair of bookend stories that have to do with African Americans, the Lutheran Church, and the city of Charleston, South Carolina. The story begins in 1816 when the Lutheran Church of German Protestants took the unprecedented step of welcoming black people into their congregations. Among those who accepted the invitation was Jehu Jones, a free black tailor living in Charleston. Jones and his wife had all 9 of their children baptized in the Lutheran Church. The Spirit moved Jones to go out and proclaim the gospel himself. In preparing to do mission work in Liberia with other members of his congregation, he traveled to New York for training, and there he was ordained in 1832. When Jones tried to return to Charleston to join his group in sailing for Liberia, however, he was arrested under a newly passed law that banned free black men from entering the state of South Carolina. Unable to return to his home and his family, isolated from the past, Jones decided that his mission in life would be to establish churches among blacks in the North. He began preaching in Philadelphia in 1838 and worked tirelessly. In visiting 2,780 families in a single year, he got enough response to start a congregation. He went on to found black Lutheran congregations in Gettysburg and Chambersburg, Pennsylvania as well. None of them, though, had a regular place to worship. Jones took the bold step of initiating a building program in Philadelphia. The problem was he was ministering to the poorest of the poor who had almost no money to contribute. While trying to keep the project going and fighting off creditors, Jones appealed to the Lutheran Pennsylvania Synod for help. Meanwhile, another black Charleston native, Daniel Payne, felt the touch of God on his shoulder and a voice saying, "I have set thee apart to educate thyself in order that thou may educate thy people." Through great effort, Payne opened a school that taught free black children by day and slaves by night. The school was a success until 1835, when the South Carolina legislature, fearing that education would lead to slave uprisings, passed a law that outlawed educational instruction for blacks. Forced to close his school, Payne did what Jehu Jones had done. He went north with plans to enter the ministry. He was advised to work in the African American churches, but Payne was a Lutheran, and he wanted to stay Lutheran. He studied at Gettysburg Lutheran Seminary, where he proved to be a brilliant student and was ordained in 1839. So, in 1838 and 39, the Lutheran Church was uniquely poised to break through the barriers of prejudice and fear in a huge way. With Jehu Jones already building Lutheran churches and the immensely talented Daniel Payne ready to do the same, the Lutheran Church was in a position to change the course of American history forever. Just a little courage, compassion, and foresight, and it would be a reality. Instead, the Pennsylvania Synod refused to give Jones a penny for his Philadelphia church. Jones organized a fundraising fair in a last-ditch effort to save his church. But an outbreak of rioting against the city's African Americans forced him to cancel it. The church building was repossessed and sold. Meanwhile, Jones' request to start a Lutheran church in New York City was rejected by Lutheran church authorities in that state, who refused to recognize Jones as a legitimate pastor. Daniel Payne, despite his credentials and recommendations, was shunned. He was never offered a position in any Lutheran church, and finally turned to the African Methodist Episcopal Church, where he proved to be a dynamic leader. We are still living with the consequences of that failure today. Churches continue to be the most racially segregated institutions in our country. Only 5 to 7% of our churches in the United States are integrated in any meaningful way, and about half of those are becoming more rather than less segregated. I can't imagine this is what Jesus intended the church to be. It's possible, though, that originally he assumed that it would be that way. We confess that Jesus was truly God and truly human, and that means Jesus was a product of his times and his environment. He lived in a time when strong prejudices existed between his people, the Jews, and the Gentiles. As a person fully human, he could not have been immune to those feelings. We see that in our gospel story today. Prior to this incident, Jesus had little to do with Gentiles. Back in chapter 10 of Matthew, he had sent his disciples out with these words, "Go nowhere among the Gentiles and enter no town of the Samaritans, but go to the lost sheep of the house of Israel." But then on a visit to Tyre and Sidon, near the northern boundary of Israel, he encounters a Gentile woman. The woman is suffering on behalf of her daughter and asks Jesus to have mercy on her. Jesus tells her, "I was sent only to the lost sheep of the house of Israel." In other words, sorry, but you're not one of us. The woman does not accept that. She draws close and falls on her knees at his feet, begging for mercy. And what is Jesus' compassionate response to this woman in need? A racial insult. It's not fair to take the children's food and throw it to the dogs. To call someone a dog was one of the strongest statements of contempt in that society. Like most Jews of his time, Jesus paints all Gentiles with that slur. This could have ended badly. The woman could have responded in kind. Her people didn't think much of Jews either. She had no doubt plenty of names, choice names that she could have called Jesus. The incident could have ended in a bitter exchange that reaffirmed each person's low opinion of the other. But this woman, faced with a desperate need, does not let pride stand in her way. Yes, Lord, she says, yet even the dogs eat crumbs that fall from the master's table. That answer blows Jesus away. I think the stories in the Bible to show how this face-to-face encounter with a person of an alien culture strips away generations of cultural fear, suspicion, and bias that have been weighting him down. Jesus looks at this woman with new eyes. Instead of seeing a Gentile, a person outside his faith with whom he has little in common, he sees a mother, just like his own. A mother in pain. A woman whose heart aches for her daughter. A lost and struggling person pleading for a ray of hope in her life. In short, he sees exactly the kind of person he has come into the world to save. Seen in that light, those seemingly insurmountable differences between Jews and Gentiles don't seem that important anymore. It may be that this incident caused Jesus to reevaluate his entire mission. For following this incident, he no longer talked about restricting his ministry to the lost sheep of Israel. Instead, he finished his work saying, "Go therefore and make disciples of all nations." Given a chance to explode the chains of racial and religious prejudice that enslave the human race in endless hatred, violence, and strife, Jesus went for it. The results have been spectacular. Imagine the same spectacular results the Lutheran Church could have achieved for this nation had it had the insight and the courage to follow Jesus' lead back in 1839. Imagine the church we would have today, the nation we would have today. Imagine what would have happened in Eau Claire if the Lutheran churches here had stood up and challenged all those real estate contracts in this city that prohibited the sale of a house to a person of color. Imagine what would have happened if, in 1966, this congregation had stood up and said, "No, we are not going to accept transfers from those who are leaving Grace Lutheran because that church called a black pastor." Water under the bridge, one might say. Look at all the progress we have made in race relations. The days of separate drinking fountains for blacks and whites are gone. We're not lynching and burning African Americans who happen to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. Our universities are fully integrated. Black athletes are no longer banned from pro baseball, football, basketball. We even elected an African American as our president. It is no longer acceptable in most places to declare ourselves racist. In fact, if anyone were to dare accuse us of being racist, we would angrily deny it. Even people caught saying or doing racist things plead temporary insanity and invariably insist, "There isn't a racist bone in my body." The progress I've seen in my lifetime has been amazing and wonderful. But I suspect that progress has lulled us to sleep. I suspect that every time I hear a person say, "There isn't a racist bone in my body," as if they are immune to original sin. At St. Sabina Catholic Church on the south side of Chicago, the worship space is dominated by a large image of a black Jesus. What would the reaction be here if we put up that large image of a black Jesus in the center of our worship space? Jesus was Middle Eastern with dark hair and dark skin and black hair. As improbable as it was that Jesus was black, it's no less improbable that he was white. So, race doesn't matter anymore? We spent a couple of days with my brother and his family in Chicago this summer. You can travel for many blocks in any direction in his neighborhood without seeing a white face. As soon as you cross the line into the first suburb to the west, everything changes instantly. Now the faces are white. Economics are a struggle on the black side of that line. On the other side of that line, you come across a high school so affluent that it has built its own parking ramp for its students. And yet, no one has a racist bone in their body. If racism in our country is not a real problem, then why has the number of hate groups in the United States, including KKK, neo-Nazis, skinheads, white nationals, and Christian identity, exploded since 2008 to the point where the Southern Poverty Law Center now tracks 784 such groups? Why did nearly a third of Mississippians in a 2011 poll support laws banning intermarriage between the races? Why have there been 154 suspected arsons of primarily black churches since 1991? Why is there such anger in the streets of the inner cities between African Americans and law enforcement? Police officers are frustrated by the impossible situations they are put in during these encounters and how people automatically assume police brutality anytime a confrontation ends in violence. They are just trying to do their jobs, they say, and if people would just cooperate with the law, none of this would happen. And yet you talk to African Americans and you will hear stories of what happened to their families and friends when they did cooperate. Brian Stevenson is a lawyer in Alabama. He and his organization have gotten more than 100 death row prisoners released, all of them poor, most of them black. How many hundreds of such people have been put to death because they could not get the legal help that proved they did not commit the crimes for which they were condemned? So, how would you imagine their friends, family, and community would react when they hear they should trust the police who just shot an unarmed man? And these are the good, decent people on both sides. We're not even talking about the hardcore criminals or the corrupt cops at whom each side points to prove the other side is evil. Oh no, we're not done with racial strife, not by a long shot. And I can't help wonder, what would our country be like today had the Lutheran Church not failed so badly at the opportunity given them with Jehu Jones and Daniel Payne? What could that have led to? Nonetheless, our racial realities in this country are what they are, and so we must deal with them. The solution is not to decide who's right or wrong or to cast blame. The incident with Jesus and the Canaanite woman is a good illustration of the fact that the only solution is for Americans of all races and creeds to listen to each other and develop trust. I certainly don't have all the answers for how to do this. But we could start where new life usually starts in the church, and that is with confession. And that means resisting the temptation to pretend we don't have a racist bone in our body. It has taken me a long time to admit that the only honest answer I can give, if asked if I'm a racist, is this: I'm trying very hard not to be. By the grace of God, I hope I'm making progress. God help me to make more. I haven't yet told you the second of the two stories that convinced me to give this sermon. It's a story that most of you know, though perhaps some of the details will surprise you. The story takes us back to Charleston, South Carolina, the home of Jehu Jones and Daniel Payne. It is now 176 years later. Yet some of the details are eerily familiar. Like his predecessors, Clement of Pinckney was an African American who felt called to serve the Lord. Like them, he looked to the Lutheran Church to learn how to do this. Pinckney earned his Master of Divinity degree from Lutheran Theological Southern Seminary, a school of our own ELCA. Like his predecessors, he proved to be a leader of unusual skill and inspiration. Like them, he ended up not in the Lutheran Church, but in the African Methodist Episcopal Church. And he was called to serve historic Emmanuel Church, the oldest black congregation in the South. There, on a Wednesday morning, June 17th of this year, he was leading a prayer meeting along with Daniel Simmons, another black ELCA-trained pastor. In walked 21-year-old Dylan Roof. The group welcomed the stranger and encouraged him to participate in the prayer session. What they did not know was that Roof was there to start a race war. After praying with the group for a long time, he stood up and opened fire, yelling racial slurs and, "Y'all want something to pray about? I'll give you something to pray about." And when he was finished, 9 lives were lost, including that of an 87-year-old woman. The sad irony of that story is that the person who ended the careers and lives of 2 wonderful and generous African-American pastors was a member of the same church that turned its back on Charleston natives Jones and Payne. Yes, Dylan Roof was a member of an ELCA congregation. Racism is part of our Lutheran heritage. It is part of our present. It is an ugly stain that just will not go away. It cannot be wiped out overnight, or in a generation, or even in a lifetime. We are challenged by our brothers and sisters in the African American churches, from whom we are separated by both our past and our present weaknesses, to take it seriously, to stand with our brothers and sisters who suffer because of it, to let them know we are with them, and to seek out ways to live together in the light of Christ's love. We are challenged to make certain our congregation follows its mission statement to be a fountain of life for all people who gather here, to stand with our brothers and sisters, to refuse to give in to the fear that stokes racism, to stand boldly against politicians who want to exploit that fear to win votes by trying to create barriers between us and them, and to honestly answer the question of, are you a racist, by confessing, I'm trying very hard not to be. By the grace of God, I hope I am making progress. God, help me to make more. And then, when God gives us the opportunity to make a difference, to promote trust and justice, that we summon the courage and the will to take on that task. Oh, what a difference that would make. Amen.
Thank you for being a part of Together in God, brought to you today by St. John's Lutheran Church. Your prayers and financial support are always deeply appreciated, and the hand of fellowship and ministry is extended to you. St. John's holds services on Sunday mornings at 8:15 and 10:45 a.m., and on Monday evening at 7 p.m. Please tune in again next Sunday at 10:30 a.m. Until we meet again, may God bless you.